I'm finally back home. This is my first class since I've been back home, and I still have to get all my hardware adjusted. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to class number 5 of the Lays of Beleriand class. I am very glad to be joining you, as you can see, in my normal habitat here tonight, and much more importantly, with my internet connection, which is exactly 100 times faster than the internet connection I was working with last week. So I'm glad to be home. After last week, I was like, I was ready to just like hug my router when I returned to my house. Anyway, so I'm looking forward to starting the Lay of Lethian tonight. First, some quick announcements. Oh, I see Yana and Arthur are. The chat room is off again? Oh man, I'm sorry. I'll have to look into that again. As I had mentioned before, we're going through this long process, and there are all these tweaks going on backstage. I'll check in with them again to make sure that gets put back. Sorry about that. Sooner or later, this process will be done, and hopefully there shan't be more disruptions of that kind. I apologize. A few quick announcements here at the beginning. Fall classes, as I've mentioned before, fall classes are now open for enrollment. Those are going to be starting, we're in August now, so we're going to be starting in just a few weeks at the end of the month of August. So our 3 classes again are Tolkien's Wars in Middle-earth with John Garth. I've just been rereading John Garth's wonderful book, Tolkien and the Great War. Recently, I'm in the middle of it again now. I'm almost up to the Battle of the Somme, which is always very moving, especially in Garth's description. He's such a beautiful writer and an eloquent speaker. But anyway, I mean, if you've ever wanted to know more about Tolkien's life, his early life, I was especially struck this past semester. Of course, as I've mentioned before, and many of you here attended the class, my class on Tolkien's poetry. And of course, it being me, the way that I did the Tolkien's poetry class was mostly let's just focus on reading the poetry. So I kind of, more or less on purpose, said let's sort of ignore the context, forget about the date, and, well, not exactly forget about the date, but anyway, forget about, what was going on in Tolkien's life or whatever, and let's just focus on this poem that he wrote. And I've been really struck by that, of course, in Garth's book. The way that he really approaches Tolkien's work, he's very intimately making connections, looking at the context, thinking about telling the story of Tolkien's Oxford undergraduate career, and then immediately upon his finishing, his preparations for war and his being sent across to France to fight the Germans. And Garth, that is, not Tolkien, looks at the poems that he wrote, almost all of which we talked about in my class this past semester. But it's just so fresh and interesting to read those poems again, having just thought about them and read them a lot. But to be thinking about them within the context that Garth is putting them, to be able to think about, where Tolkien was in army camp at the time when he wrote this particular poem, and it's a kind of analysis that I don't usually do. I'm not particularly good at it, and and to be totally honest, I think that a lot of people do it kind of badly. That is to say, very too often I find that when people are doing are sort of making connections between an author's life and his works, that leads to extremely oversimplified and unthoughtful readings of the text. That is, it seems to be in the mind of many critics a kind of a justification for not even reading the text carefully, right? It's like what's going on in the author's life gives us a kind of, decoder ring, right, to approach the work. So we don't have to actually read the work carefully. We already know what's really going on, right? Because what he's really thinking about in this poem, obviously, is what's going on in his life at that time. So, you just kind of project his life onto the work, and Bob's your uncle, right? Garth does a really good job of not doing that, and I have a great deal of respect for Garth's approach. I love listening to his I'm listening to the audiobook, which fortunately is read by him. So I love listening to his analysis of the poems as he's thinking through the poems very carefully, but again within this context of what's going on in Tolkien's life and with his relationship with his friends in the TCBS, his old, what in America we would call his old high school friends, with whom he was still so close. So anyway, I just would want to emphasize that this class with John Garth is going to be just an amazing opportunity. I think that John Garth is the great. He hasn't written a full biography of Tolkien's life, though I know he would love to do that. But I think that he's just the most sort of powerful biographer of Tolkien living. That is of people who are working on Tolkien's life and dealing with Tolkien's own story and the connection between his own story and his works. I think Garth does it better than anybody else, and it's just a really neat opportunity to be able to do that. And then, of course, we also have the introduction to Anglo-Saxon. Don't think I need to sort of sell that and why that's so important. And of course, the Star Wars class, which of course is obviously awesome. Anyway. Those are coming. I've got the fall classes very much in my mind, and again Garth, because I've been reading his book, so that's been very, very, very present in my mind. A quick reminder that we're starting season 1 of the Silmarillion film project next Friday, so that's a week from this coming Friday, 9 days from now. So get ready with your ideas for how we're approaching the big question: how do we do the Ainulindale? How do we do the pre-arrival of the elves portion of the Silmarillion story? It's going to be a really challenging season to plan out. So I hope you guys will be able to join us for that. The initial discussions where we plan out the whole season are going to be really, really important ones. So that's going to be next week. Okay, very good. Let's. Oh yes, Yana and Grifflet will be back in Middle Earth this Friday. So yes, I will be back doing my Lotro stream, my live stream of my adventures through Lord of the Rings Online. Where sort of talk where as I sort of go through the game, look at the choices, and both the visual and the story, the narrative adaptation that they've done with Tolkien's work, and try to keep my character from getting killed. So anyway, that should be. I'm really looking forward to getting into that. I had no prayer of being able to do that last week. I had less than 1/10 of the bandwidth that I needed to stream Lotro, so I had no prayer last week. But again, I'm really looking forward to getting back to that. So that's Friday. That will be this coming Friday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time is when that happens, and you can find it. It takes place on Turbine's. Turbine is the company that produces Lord of the Rings Online, the game, and their official Twitch feed. So twitch.tv/LotroStream is where you can find that. All right, let us go to Beren and Luthien, and as we start with Beren and Luthien, I want to go back to finally talking about the thing that I've been sort of teasing you with for 2 weeks, and that is the poem "Light as Leaf on Linden Tree." Oh, yeah, here we are. Okay, sorry. Seem to have messed up my screen here somehow. Oop, that messed it up even more. Just the wrong button right there. Okay, all right, there we are. Light as Leaf on Linden Tree, as I said. So this is the poem, of course, that is inserted within the Lay of the Children of Hurin, as you will recall. This is sort of part of that major Beren and Luthien upwelling that we were seeing happening in the second version, in his rewriting of the Lay of the Children of Hurin. And this is, to me, by far the most conspicuous element of that Beren and Luthien upwelling that we get, because we were looking, for instance, at how when the narrator of the Lay of the Children of Hurin summarizes the Beren and Luthien story for context, right? Or, context of why Morwen is thinking about sending Turin to Thingol in Doriath. That summary gets protracted, but it's a super long alliterative treatment in the second version of the poem, way longer than in the first version. This, however, is way more conspicuous than that, because here we see him doing something entirely different, right? I mean, this poem is a very fancy poetic set piece, which he has just just grafted in to the Lay of the Children of Hurin. It's obviously not an alliterative verse, has nothing to do with alliterative verse. If this poem was actually designed for the Lay of the Children of Hurin, of which I am not at all convinced, by the way, given how different the poetic approach is here, this reads to me like a poem that Tolkien was working on, which he decided, I'm going to put it in the Lay of the Children of Hurin, right? And you can justify the fact that the meter is completely different by having it be a song, inset within the narrative and everything, so that's all fine. But I have a hard time believing that this really grew up natively within the Lay of the Children of Hurin as he was writing it. And if it did, if he did say in version 2, okay, I think I'll put in a little, poem, hey, maybe I'll have that one rhyming instead of, being an alliterative verse, right? If that is how he approached this poem, then it got completely out of hand, right? Because this is far more than just an inset poem in that way. And of course, as we know, as Christopher Tolkien mentions, he did publish this separately in 1925 in the magazine called The Griffin. So, we know that this poem was already sort of sufficiently independent in his mind, even before it was sort of spliced into the Way of the Children of Hurin. Again, spliced is my theory there, but anyway, before it was inset within the Way of the Children of Hurin, he clearly either already had plans to publish it or was going to extract it to publish it, or whatever. But anyway, this is clearly one of these moments where we can see him most lingering on the story of Beren and Luthien. So let's look at this poem. I am going to try to be efficient in talking about this poem. It's going to be hard because I love this poem. This is one of my 5 favorite poems by Tolkien ever. I mean, I absolutely love this poem. And you will recognize it, undoubtedly. This poem is the one which he revises and gives to Aragorn in the Fellowship of the Ring. But I have to admit, I actually like this version better. I like the older version better than the version that's in The Lord of the Rings. The version that's in The Lord of the Rings is very good. I don't dislike it. I don't think it's bad. I don't think he made it worse by revising it. It does work better, I think, within the narrative of The Lord of the Rings than this version would. The main difference that I would point to between this version, the old version, and Aragorn's version of this poem is that Aragorn's version is much less ornate. The sort of poetic fireworks that he does in this poem, which we'll talk about, those are smoothed over. A lot of them are removed or kind of damped down. It's not as flashy poetically in Aragorn's version, and that seems to me appropriate. This version of the poem seems to me a little bit too ornate to be a poem you just sing around a fire, a campfire. Right, again, I think the version in the Fellowship of the Ring works really well there, but this version is really awesome. So let's look at this first. I'm going to read the first stanza, and the first thing we're going to, before we even talk about what is happening in this stanza, I want to focus on the sound, because what Tolkien does with his verse in this poem, this is one of the most complex and gorgeous pieces of verse that Tolkien ever wrote. So let's look at how it sounds and how it functions. And those of you who looked at this poem with me before in the class last semester will be able to help out. The grass was very long and thin, the leaves of many years lay thick, the old tree roots wound out and in, and the early moon was glimmering. There went her white feet lilting quick, and Dairon's flute did bubble thin, as 'neath the hemlock umbels thick, Tinuviel danced a shimmering. Okay, first, the meter. What do you notice about the meter? What do you notice about the sound of the lines? What do you notice? Notice how smooth these lines are? This is a really regular meter, and it's in 4 beats per line. The grass was very long and thin, the leaves of many years lay thick, the old tree roots wound out and in, and the early moon was glimmering. 4 beats per line. Yeah, Arthur, totally different feel from the Turin poem. Totally different feel. It's a syllabic line, right, which means we're counting syllables, and it's in a regular metric pattern. This is iambic tetrameter, right? 4 feet, 2 beats per foot, 8 syllables per line. Same number as in the Lay of Lethian, by the way. Same line that he uses, though not the same metrical pattern. The grass was very long and thin, the leaves of many years lay thick, the old tree roots wound out and in. It's extremely regular. Very regular all the way through. He almost never varies from it. And you can see what's more, that he's obviously focusing on making it as regular as possible. I feel you can conclude fairly clearly from this first stanza that Tolkien is going out of his way to make it as regular as possible. Look at that last line, right? Tinuviel danced a shimmering. You don't say a shimmering in normal conversation, right? Why has he said a shimmering instead of just shimmering? To maintain the meter. He wants to maintain that even iambic beat. Tinuviel danced a shimmering, right? If he just said Tinuviel danced shimmering, hear the pause there? You can't not pause there. Tinuviel danced shimmering. Now that kind of effect can often work really well. He does that kind of thing in poetic lines all the time. He's not just a slave to meter, usually, but here he's going way out of his way to maintain the meter. It's very fluid, very, and this is a dancing song, right? So lots of dancing goes on in this song, and it's very smooth and regular, for one thing. Second thing, look at the rhyme. What do you notice about the rhyme pattern? These are 8-line stanzas, right? The whole poem is in 8-line stanzas. What do you notice about the rhyme scheme of these lines? What's the rhyme scheme? Thin, thick, in, glimmering, quick, thin, thick, shimmering. Yes, Arthur, it's symmetrical. So notice, well, the first thing to notice is sort of the overall frame of the stanza, that is glimmering, shimmering, right? So it's 8 lines divided into 2 4-line quatrains, right? The first one ends with glimmering, the second one ends with shimmering. So you have those, they're the C rhymes, it's the third rhyming set. You've got thin, in, thin, thick, quick, thick, right? The thin's ins are the A rhyme, the thick, quick is the B rhyme, the glimmering, shimmering is the C rhyme. So the C rhyme on lines 4 and 8, as I say, provide a kind of a framework for the entire stanza. Not only are they sort of evenly spaced, framing the ends of the quatrains, but they're also multisyllabic lines. All of the C rhymes are trisyllabic rhymes. All 3 syllables, glimmering, shimmering. And we see that all the way through. Sorrowing, following. That's also a trisyllabic rhyme in the second stanza too. You will also notice that there's that sort of notice the motif that we have going there. That these C rhymes tend most of the time in this poem, with some important exceptions, to be progressive verbs. Glimmering, shimmering, sorrowing, following. Verbs ending in ing is the theme of those C rhymes. Okay? Now, look at the A and B rhymes and how they're shaped. As Arthur says, they're symmetrical, right? A, B, A, C. B, A, B, C. See how that works? We've got those 6 lines share 2 rhymes. Thin, thick, in, quick, thin, thick. Right? But they're symmetrical. So you've got the ABA in the top half, BAB in the bottom half. So you have the 2 halves of these stanzas, right? Which sort of again pivots around the C rhyme. They are mirror images of each other. So that suggests this kind of connection, this kind of relationship. So he can kind of play with that, the different halves of these stanzas in this way, right? And there's more that makes it symmetrical than just the rhyme scheme, right? Exactly, as both Sarah Lagarde and Kate Neville are reminding us, he doesn't just use rhyme, doesn't just use A and B rhymes. He repeats the exact same words. Thin, thick, thin, thick. Lines 1 and 2 end with thin and thick. Rhymes lines 6 and 7 end with thin and thick. Right? So he actually repeats the same words. That's not laziness on his part. You might think, oh, well, that's kind of cheating on the whole rhyming department, right? Just repeat the same word. No, it's really much harder to do that than to just come up with a rhyme. There are lots of words that rhyme with thin that you could use. But to take a word pair like that, a non-rhyming pair like thin and thick, and work those same two consecutive words into the end of the stanza, as you did in the beginning of the stanza, that's really demanding. But again, invites us to be connecting the top half and the bottom half of the stanza with each other. So, and Sharon, as you say, not have the repeated rhymes seem awkward. I would bet, because most people, when you point that out, didn't even recognize it at first. I know I didn't. I mean, I was like most of the way through this stanza, through this poem, rather, reading it for the first time. No, reading it for the second time. I didn't notice it at all the first time. Only reading it the second time, when I was actually reading it aloud, did I suddenly be like, hey, wait a second. Right? That's the same, because I was looking at the rhymes. I'm like, okay, noiselessly leaves on the second stanza now. Noiselessly leaves country, sorrowing, sheaves, noiselessly leaves. Hey, wait a second, right? And he does the same thing. He does this in every stanza. So to repeat this, but not to make it to still make it flow and make it not intrusive, really, really challenging. The degree of difficulty of this poem is super high, and yet I think he really succeeds beautifully there. Because again, you can point out all of these sort of the ornate structures of the rhyme scheme and everything that he's setting up, but yet when you're listening to it, you cannot even, it is quite possible not even to notice or consciously think about those things because it's so fluid and so beautiful. Okay, now let's actually pay attention to what it says. I'll sort of go through stanza by stanza. I will, because I'm going to try not to spend the whole class talking about this poem. I'm going to sort of highlight as I go through. I'm going to go through and sort of highlight the major things. Do feel free to add observations that you have. I'll try to get to as many of those as I can, but as I say, my goal is to not spend the whole class on this poem, which I kind of did when we did this poem in my poetry class. I was supposed to do like 6 other poems, and we kind of spent the entire class session talking about this poem. So I'm going to try not to do that again. I really want to get to the actual poem, Lay of Lethian, before the end of class. That's my humble goal. Okay, Karita says, try is the word that stands out to me as you speak. True enough, Karita. Karita, of course, was there last time I attempted and failed at this project. So, okay, look at this note. Now, with that structure in mind, thinking about the first half of the stanza and the second half of the stanza, and that rhymes, the kind of cues that we get from that rhyme structure. Let's look at stanza 1. The grass was very long and thin, the leaves of many years lay thick, the old tree roots wound out and in, and the early moon was glimmering. There went her white feet lilting quick, and Dairon's flute did bubble thin, as 'neath the hemlock umbels thick, Tinuviel danced a shimmering. So again, we see the stanza divided into 2 halves. The first half of the stanza is about the forest, and the emphasis is on the richness, the ancientry, the depth of the forest, right? The length of the grass, the thickness of the leaves upon the floor of the forest, the old tree roots winding all around, right? So we have this deep, old, rich, ancient forest, and the early moon was glimmering. So I love the fact that it's the early moon, right? Sort of the contrast of the sort of the implication of of youth there, right? Not everything here is like old and ancient crotchety, right? The forest may be ancient, and yet there are young and beautiful things afoot here, right? The moon, first of all, but of course the moon. I was going to say the moon is foreshadowing, that seems an ironic word. For lightning, for shimmering, perhaps, Luthien. Anyway, because the second half of the stanza, corresponding to the first, now within this forest we have the music and magic of Luthien and Dairon, the dancing of Luthien, the fluting of Dairon, beneath the hemlock umbels thick, right? So again, notice how that thin, thick repetition brings, explicitly here, connects Dairon and Luthien within the context of this ancient forest described up at the beginning. And then Tinuviel danced a shimmering. So the early moon was glimmering, Tinuviel danced a shimmering. The moon is glimmering, Tinuviel is shimmering. We can see clearly the parallel that's being established between Tinuviel and the moon. Sue Gifford says, the idea of feet being lilting is beautiful. As a dancer, that is an absolutely gorgeous image of lightness and control. I agree, Sue. I think that is a brilliant word choice for feet, for dancing feet. Tolkien is very fond of using the word twinkling to describe the feet of a dancer, but lilting, I agree, is really a wonderful word choice. The pale moths lumbered noiselessly, and daylight died among the leaves, as Beren from the wild country came thither wayworn sorrowing. He peered between the hemlock sheaves, and watched in wonder noiselessly her dancing through the moonlit leaves, and the ghostly moths a-following. Okay. What do you notice here? Okay, we have the two halves again. Notice in the first half of the stanza, we get two things, right? The moths and Beren, right? They're twice linked. The moths and Beren are twice linked within the stanza, once in the first half and once in the second half, right? The pale moths lumbered noiselessly. And Sue, lumbered is I love that word choice there. The idea of a moth lumbering. I mean, the word lumbering just does not seem like, it's not a word you would normally associate with a flying creature. But if you did, I don't usually associate the word lumbering with a flying creature, but when I do, I would associate it with moths, actually. That seems a perfect description of the sort of heavy and clumsy flight of moths. But it is, Arthur, as you point out, there's irony in the fact that they're lumbering noiselessly. Two concepts you don't associate with each other. Tom Hillman points out the lumbering is a nice contrast to lilting, right? Absolutely it is. And of course we have, I don't think we're supposed to avoid the associations with moths, right? The moths are drawn towards the light. She's shimmering, right? Like the moonlight. They are drawn to her. And perhaps you're thinking, well, wait a second. Isn't that a little ominous? Because, I mean, we all know about moths being attracted to light, right? That doesn't always end well. In fact, it kind of often doesn't end well, right? Moths being attracted to light. So, is that bad? Is it creepy? Is it, is that kind of negative or sort of cautionary association appropriate here? I would say it absolutely is appropriate here. Beren, and that is, notice the context of this. Well, yeah, no, okay. Notice the context of this. What's happening? What's happening in this story? Forget everything, forget what you know from the Book of Lost Tales, certainly forget what you know from the published Silmarillion, but just from what we see here within this poem. What's happening here? Who's Beren? What kind of story are we reading? Sarah King, yeah, it's a fairy sighting, right? This is a kind of story with which we should be familiar if we've read any fairy stories at all, right? Mortal man blundering through the woods, even lumbering maybe through the woods, possibly literally lumbering, right? In a different sense, he might be a woodsman. Anyway, he's wandering through the woods, and he comes across a fairy dancing, right? And he is stricken by the beauty of the dancing fairy, and he's there. He's in the bushes, right? He's peering through the leaves and just in awe of the beautiful dancing fairy. I mean, and that's Kate, exactly as you point out. Kate Neville points out, remember, the description of the first stanza is not a tended garden. It's clearly a forest. And that's exactly the kind of setting in which this sort of thing happens, right? When a mortal wandering through the forest, possibly minding his own business, and then is, suddenly confronted with this. That happens a lot. And it doesn't usually end well for the mortal man, right? If he's lucky, it'll usually end in his disappointment. If he's unlucky, something much, much worse could happen to him if he does, in fact, make the choice to jump out of the bushes and try to join in the dance or do something even more proactive, right? No, almost always, no, I say it a different way, almost never does that end well, right? And already in these first two stanzas, that seems to be the kind of story that we're in. This is where I think the moths are important, right? Because that idea of attraction, of even, dare I say, a fatal attraction of the mortal towards the fae, the whole moth thing seems to work really well right there. And that's the context in which Beren is introduced. Here's Beren and the moths, both drawn towards the shimmering light of Tinuviel in this stanza. Okay. And notice daylight is dying. I mean, that could be said in a lot of ways, but again, that doesn't sound good, right? Sounds a little ominous. Came thither way-worn sorrowing. He peered between the hemlock sheaves and watched in wonder noiselessly her dancing through the moonlit leaves and the ghostly moths a-following. Notice it was the moths who were noiseless, who were lumbering noiselessly in the first stanza, and now he's watching noiselessly, so we see him being connected with the moths again, right? He has sort of taken over the noiselessness of the moths. See the effect of the repetition of the same words, right? It really invites you to make those connections. The moths are noiseless. Beren is noiseless. Right? In case we weren't connecting with the moths before, we should be now. And daylight died among the leaves, right? So we have the death of the day and the going down of the light, her dancing through the moonlit leaves. Day is dying, the moonlight dancing of Tinuviel is rising, right? Is shimmering out in the growing darkness. Really cool. Oh, neat observation. How do you pronounce your first name? Is it a hard CH? Is it Ritual? Rickle? Rick? Is it Rick or Rich? I'm not sure which one it is. Anyway, however it is, you correctly pronounced your name, is pointing out the parallel. The early moon was glimmering in stanza 1, and daylight died among the leaves there in stanza 2. So pointing out this sort of hard CH. Rickle. Okay, good. How we have a sort of mingling of the lights effect. Yes, it does take place right at that twilight moment. Twilight being a really important moment. Read Tolkien's poetry and see how often twilight comes up. It's really interesting. Anyway, okay, good. And what's our C rhyme? Sorrowing, following, right? So we see he comes in sorrowing. He comes into the stanza sorrowing. He leaves the stanza following. Well, it's the moths following, but again, we know, like, Beren and the moths are like this, right? Okay. We're moving on. Their magic took his weary feet, and he forgot his loneliness, and out he danced, unheeding, fleet, where the moonbeams were a-glistening. Through the tangled woods of Elfiness they fled on nimble fairy feet, and left him to his loneliness in the silent forest listening. Okay, so what happened here? Beren forgets his loneliness, right? And this is a particularly poignant word repetition, right? His feet are weary from his sorrowing wandering, right, before. But now magic has taken his weary feet, and his feet, which are weary, so we got his weariness and his loneliness, are both forgotten and left behind by the magic that draws him out, right? The magic that sort of grabs him upon seeing Tinuviel. But then in the second half, so again, this is another one of those stanzas where the two different halves of the stanza are really important. Right? The first half is Beren jumping out to join them and start dancing, and the second half is them running away. Right? So he comes and they go. And again, that's strongly emphasized. And not only is that fact emphasized, but the effect of that is emphasized with that word repetition. His feet are weary, but his loneliness forgotten in the first half. And in the second half, their feet are nimble fairy feet, right? They don't have weary human feet. They have nimble fairy feet, and they are out of there, which is what fairies do. If you catch fairies dancing in the woods and you jump out, guess what's going to happen? At the very least thing you can expect is they're going to be gone. That's very canonical, right? And so they have nimble fairy feet, and they left him to his loneliness, and you can see the really sad correlation there, right? He forgot his loneliness and left him to his loneliness in the silent forest, listening, and the shift from where the moonbeams were glistening, right? He is coming out into the light, and then he is left alone in the silence. Right, and with that emphasis on listening, right? He's straining his ear, and he's hearing nothing. He is all alone. He's left again to his loneliness. We have again the first half of the stanza emphasizing, the glory of their dance and his desire to join it, and then their absence in the second half. Still hearkening for the imagined sound of lissom feet upon the leaves, for music welling underground in the dim-lit caves of Doriath. But withered are the hemlock sheaves, and one by one with mournful sound whispering fall the beechen leaves in the dying woods of Doriath. So what happens here? Who's this stanza about? This is really cool what Tolkien does here. Look at the syntax of this stanza. Still hearkening for the... Let's play a game. Let's play one of my favorite poetic games, which is find the subject and verb of the sentence, right? Still hearkening for the imagined sound of lissom feet upon the leaves, for music welling underground in the dim-lit caves of Doriath. Kate's got it. Beren is the one who's hearkening, but that's not the subject. That word doesn't appear, right? It's a trick question. Kate got it right. No, the subject is sentence starts 4 lines into the previous stanza, right? Through the tangled woods of Elfiness they fled on nimble fairy feet, and left him to his loneliness in the silent forest, listening, still hearkening for the imagined sound. All of this stuff is modifying him, right? What does he do? He is in the silent forest, listening, still hearkening for the imagined sound. So it was a trick question. But it's an important trick question, right? That is, this whole stanza is about Beren. We could have started the stanza that way, right? He could have been like, and there stood Beren hearkening, right? Like, we could have gone there, right? But he doesn't go there. The whole stanza is about Beren. Beren has been left alone. And how does he respond when he is left alone? He is the doer, the focal point of this entire stanza, and yet he's not there. His name is never mentioned. This whole stanza is one of desolation, right? It's not even action exactly. He's just hearkening. He's waiting. There's nothing for him to do but wait and listen. So there he is, the center of this stanza, doing nothing, right? Almost invisibly, as time passes. Hearkening. Notice the whole first quatrain, first half of this stanza, stanza 4, is all about what he's listening for, right? It's not about what actually happens. It's, again, like a memory. We see him dwelling in his memory on the imagined sound of lissome feet upon the leaves, right? We're hearing about his imagination in action, right? This is what he's listening for. But starts the second half of the stanza, right? So again, first half of the stanza, this is what I'm thinking about and longing for and hearkening for, but this is what actually we get, right? But again, notice the second half of the stanza is not about his actions at all, right? He hearkens for this. He's listening for this, but, and again, you'd think the completion of that sentence would be, but he didn't hear anything, right? Or he didn't find anything, or something that starts with the subject he or Baron, right? But we don't get that. Again, he's listening for this, but the hemlock sheaves are withered, and one by one with mournful sound whispering fall the beechen leaves. So the beechen leaves fall, the hemlock sheaves are withered in the dying woods of Doriath. And the connection with Baron, time is passing, but again, that the withering of the leaves and the falling of the leaves, it does tell us a lot about Baron and what's going on with Baron, right? It tells us a lot about his state, but indirectly, right? Again, he's good. Kate Neville says the poem abandons him too. Yeah, exactly. Now, what else is funny about this stanza? Not funny, but what else is weird about this stanza? We've broken a pattern, big pattern in this stanza. Where? Which pattern did we break? You notice? The C rhyme. Look at the C rhyme. We get a trisyllabic C rhyme. Doriath, Doriath. It's the first stanza whose C rhyme is not a set of progressive verbs, right? Glimmering, shimmering, glistening, listening, following, sorrowing. I did those in the wrong order. Doriath, Doriath. Well, doesn't that seem kind of appropriate, right? And a progressive verb, by definition, a present progressive verb, is a verb describing an action that is continuously going on right now, right? What's going on right now with Baron? Nothing. Nothing. He's sitting. He's waiting. We could still use those verbs. I was just using present progressive verbs, right? But the poem emphasizes this by... We don't even get a verb. We just get a noun, right? Kate, you're on a roll tonight. Kate Neville says Tinuviel has taken the verbs away. Yes, exactly. There is no glistening. There can be no glistening, glimmering, shimmering, or following when there is no Tinuviel around. And you can carry on listening, I guess, if you want, but there's nothing to listen to. Okay, all right, let's keep going. We're making good progress. He sought her. Now, finally, we get Baron back on the subject of a sentence and with an action verb, too. He sought her wandering near and far, where the leaves of one more year were strewn, by winter moon and frosty star, with shaken light a-shivering. He found her 'neath a misty moon, a silver wraith that danced afar, and the mists beneath her feet were strewn in moonlight palely quivering. Okay. He's seeking her, right? So we see him, he's wandering near and far. We've got the emphasis again on the passing of time. You know, the seasons have passed. A year is going by winter moon and frosty star, with shaken light a-shivering. Once again, we start with the moon and the moonlight, just like we did in stanza 1. We get the again, foreshadowing, the foreshimmering of her presence, not only by the light of the moon, but by the return of the present progressive verbs, right? Shivering, which is, of course, a particularly appropriate word to use of moonlight in wintertime. And then, of course, he sees Tinuviel again beneath a misty moon. Notice, again, the parallel. He sought her wandering near and far, where the leaves of one more year were strewn, a silver wraith that danced afar, and the mists beneath her feet were strewn. Okay, so he is wandering near and far to seek for her, and then he finds her like a silver wraith afar. Right, so we both the front and the back halves of the stanza emphasize the distance. First, in his wandering, which seems perhaps hopeless, but then beyond hope, he does find her again, though still the distance remains. She is dancing afar. And the dead leaves, which were strewn on the ground during his search. So again, the emphasis on withering and falling and the passing of time, and now we have the mists strewn beneath her feet instead of the passing of the year. So there's this sort of eerie sort of timelessness to the situation. You know, she is like moonlight in the mist. We're no longer thinking about the passing of time anymore. In the moonlight, palely quivering. Sue, what a wonderful observation. Sue says, if she has mists beneath her feet, she must be dancing above the earth. Can't rule that out, Sue. Absolutely can't rule that out. It's entirely possible. That's what we'll see. So we'll see a reference to that issue later on. It seems that Luthien is perhaps capable of dancing in the air. She danced upon a hillock green. See, in fact, Sue, we get to it right away here, right, in stanza 6. She danced upon a hillock green, whose grass unfading kissed her feet, while Dairon's fingers played unseen, or his magic flute a-flickering. And out he danced, unheeding, fleet, in the moonlight to the hillock green. No impress found he of her feet, that fled him swiftly flickering. No impress found he of her feet, Sue, right? She's not leaving any footprints on the grass. Is she even touching the earth? We can't really be sure. Exactly, Yana, she might be dancing on the mist itself. You can't rule it out. Sarah Lagarde, of course, is pointing to Legolas's lack of footprints in the snow. So, yeah, I mean, if even Legolas, who is far less lilting than Luthien. I mean, no offense, Legolas, but come on. Yeah, you'd think. So anyway, okay. So she danced upon a hillock green. Green strikes me as a really important word in this stanza, not only because, of course, it's one of our repeated pair, so we should pay attention to it, but the wintry moonlit scene, it was a very kind of black and white, silvery scene. A silver wraith that danced afar in the mists and the pale moonlight, right? It was not a vibrantly colorful scene, but now, as we appear to be getting closer to Luthien, right, and now it's like life is returning, right? Now we get a green hillock and grass, right? Grass unfading beneath her feet, kissing her feet, and may or may not be being pressed by her feet. Notice that the C rhyme is also a repeated word in this stanza, or his magic flute a-flickering that fled him swiftly flickering. So we get, first it's Dairon's fingers on his flute that are flickering, secondly Tinuviel's feet on the hillock that are swiftly flickering. So again, we can see the likeness between his music and her dancing. The sort of the magic pairing of these two, elvish figures. We see the emphasis not only on the bringing of light and color back to our at times almost disembodied baron who barely even got a pronoun before, much less any life or color, and now he's getting those, having found Tinuviel again, but again finding in the first stanza, losing in the second stanza as she swiftly flickers away. And notice how much worse it seems this time. That is, how much more hopeless it seems this time. I mean, last time she was dancing, he's like, "Hey, I'd like to dance with you," and she's like, "No way," and she runs, right? And she's more nimble. She has nimble fairy feet before, but I mean, now she's not even leaving an impress, and the grass is just kissing her feet. It now seems much more hopeless to catch this person, right? And in a sense, less even, right? Him coming out to dance with her seems more of a mismatch in this scene than it did before. Yeah. Yeah, good. Kate Neville is pointing to the emphasis on those, how many of the ing verbs we get in this stanza. And then moving into the the next stanza is my absolute favorite. Okay, look at this next stanza, because I'm telling you, boy. Okay. And longing filled his voice that called Tinuviel, Tinuviel, and longing sped his feet enthralled behind her wayward shimmering. She heard as echo of a spell his lonely voice that longing called Tinuviel, Tinuviel. One moment paused she glimmering. Okay, look what happens here. We get the same shape, right? The rhyme scheme and everything is the same shape. Even the C rhyme is even repeated. Shimmering and glimmering we've had before. We had that in stanza 1. The order is reversed. Though even notice the effect of that. Back in stanza 1 we had the moon glimmering, and then she was dancing. She danced a shimmering in line 8 of stanza 1. The order of them has switched, but she's the one who's glimmering. One moment paused she glimmering, right? There was that parallel, that association between her and the moonlight all the way through the poem. It's almost like nearing an identity, right? She herself is glimmering. It's like she is now actually the light source. It's not just that she's dancing in the moonlight. She sort of is the moonlight, actually. Of course, we've seen the shape. We've been talking about those repeated words, line 1 and 2 and line 6 and 7, called Tinuviel, called Tinuviel, the most important repeated line coupling in the entire poem, right? Called Tinuviel, called Tinuviel. That is the very heart of this poem. Baron's calling out to Tinuviel. Notice how her name, Tinuviel, Tinuviel, is perfect iambic tetrameter when repeated twice, right? That is his call to her is as an echo of a spell. The way that his calling to her, and the way that her name itself works metrically here to make one whole line, two whole lines devoted to just her name, to his call. So again, the first thing that we see is that repeated structure, with the repetition of the end word in line 2 and line 7, is further emphasized by having the entire lines identical in 2 and 7. Tinuviel, Tinuviel. And the emphasis on called, right? And longing filled his voice that called, his lonely voice, that longing called. And notice the symmetry there, right? Longing filled, that longing called. And in the middle is his loneliness, right? And look at the rhyme scheme, the way that symmetrical ABA, BAB, right? The ABA rhymes called Tinuviel, enthralled. The BAB rhymes spell, called Tinuviel, right? So cool. So you've got called and Tinuviel framing enthralled and spell, right? He called her and she was enthralled. She heard his echo of a spell, Tinuviel. Now, the irony here, right? This is a mind-blowing stanza. It might not seem like a mind-blowing stanza to you because you already know the story of Luthien and Dairon, right? So you've been waiting for this moment when he calls her by her elvish name. That's, again, how Aragorn says it in his version of the poem in the Fellowship of the Ring. So you know what happens. You know the turning point of the Beren and Luthien story is when he calls out to her and she stops, right? And doesn't run away. And long ago she laid her hand in his, right? We know this story. But again, think about it in the context of this guy. This is a common theme of fairy story, as it talked about before, right? But this never happens. This never happens. Now, I'm not saying that that there are no precedents of humans and fairies having a positive relationship, right? The best example of that, in my unbiased opinion, is the story of Sir Lanval. He meets an extremely and inexplicably well-disposed towards him fairy lady who takes him as her lover and her lord, and he screws it up and she forgives him, and they go off to Fairy and live, so far as we can tell, happily ever after. But the going off to Fairy part, that's from Marie de France's version in her collection of Breton lays. But anyway, that can sometimes happen. Sometimes, like when you really win the lottery, you can go into the forest and find a fairy queen waiting for you, who is, for reasons best known to herself, wanting to sleep with you and be your lover. Doesn't always happen. Not exactly the kind of thing you can count on. But when it does happen, that's the premise of the whole story, right? There's none of this and I'm peeping through the bushes and I'm seeing her dancing or singing, and then I jump out and I'm like, hey, can I join you? When you do that, when the approach of the mortal to the fairy is clandestine, and when his intrusion is uninvited, it never ends well. Never ends well. And then here, bam, right? And the irony of that, the shock of that reversal, that she stops and turns to him, is emphasized by the irony of that she heard as echo of a spell. Wait. He, the mortal dude, casts a spell on her, the fairy princess, dancing in the woods? That's not how the story goes, right? It's enthralling often happens, right? Calling even occasionally happens. But spells often happen, but it works the other way around, right? Karita, you're right. She will also, it's possible that the Fairy Queen will have lunch with you. In fact, there's a pretty high correlation between, if the Fairy Queen is waiting to sleep with you, she'll probably give you a really nice lunch afterwards. Or before, as you say. Sometimes then it happens that way too. Yes, exactly. That's one, but that's not where we are here, right? This is the turning point of this, not only of this poem, not only of this story, but in a sense of Tolkien's sort of treatment of this whole genre sort of turns on itself right here. But why? How? What is it what's the spell? Why how the enthrallment? It's her own compassion, right? He doesn't actually have magic powers, right? It is her own, it is the pity that she has on him. Again, remember the way that the symmetry of line 1 and 6 there, and longing filled his voice that called, his lonely voice that longing called. When you've got why is she enthralled? Why does she hear his call as the echo of a spell? Because what she hears in his call is loneliness surrounded by longing, right? Loneliness embedded within longing, and she hears that and she pities that. And what happens? And Beren caught that elfin maid, and kissed her trembling starlit eyes, Tinuviel, whom love delayed, in the woods of evening morrowless. Till moonlight and till music dies, shall Beren by the elfin maid dance in the starlight of her eyes, in the forest singing sorrowless. You'll of course notice what happened with our C rhymes here. We've changed from, this is now the second time that we have deviated from the ing progressive verbs, right? First was in stanza 4 with the Doriath. Now we shift to morrowless and sorrowless, right? Really cool. The less ending. Notice how both of them work. We don't have any more like the trade-off, the symmetry from one half. The two halves of the stanza are working together, right? The first stanza talks about the present tense, right? What happened next, right? What happened now when she pauses and turns to him? Answer, he catches her benevolently, right? And kissed her trembling starlit eyes. What a beautiful line that is. In the woods of evening morrowless, right? It's evening. It's always twilight with no tomorrow. It's the twilight on which the dawn never comes. Now, if that sounds bad, I mean, one could say, like, well, hang on, is that a good thing? Being morrowless, like there's no tomorrow's never going to come? Is that ominous? No, it's not ominous. And here I think that Tolkien is referring to the medieval love poetry conventions. Tolkien is not a big fan of the courtly love tradition by any stretch, but he will know that one of the most frequent motifs of medieval love poetry is the Alba, the lamentation of the dawn. It's a set piece in almost all love poetry of the Middle Ages. After the consummation, it's almost always happens at the end of the first night. The lovers are finally together, but dawn always comes. Dawn is not your friend when you are a clandestine lover. And the cruel, inexorable coming of the dawn will often receive sometimes comically, sometimes poetic lamentations of comically inappropriate length, right? Which leads you to think either A, you're totally going to get caught while you're sitting here, speechifying about the dawn, or B, you could have been doing better things during that time. I mean, why are you spending so much time talking about how your time is being tragically cut short? Anyway, at least I often think those things when I'm reading these long passages lamenting the coming of the dawn. I think it is in that sense that they are in the woods of evening morrowless, always in this twilight, moonlit place, but the cruel dawn never comes, the dream never ends. Beren is never going to wake from this dream. Not that it's literally a dream, metaphorically. But then we go to the future, right? Till moonlight and till music dies, shall Beren by the elfin maid dance in the starlight of her eyes, in the forest singing sorrowless. Morrowless, sorrowless. That's pretty awesome, right? And notice how we've got it. He doesn't just repeat eyes and eyes, right? He repeats the starlight image. In the first half of the poem, we have him kissing her trembling starlit eyes, and then Beren shall dance in the starlight of her eyes. So we see him dancing with her, him drawn into the dance as he was initially compelled, the weariness and the loneliness passing from him, remember at the beginning? And we see that passing into this perfect state of sorrowlessness. It's really beautiful, so I'm so glad that we ended happily ever after, except wait, there's another stanza, and this is a separate stanza. Wherever grass is long and thin, and the leaves of countless years lie thick, and ancient roots wind out and in, as once they did in Doriath, shall go their white feet lilting quick, but never Dairon's music thin be heard beneath the hemlocks thick, since Beren came to Doriath. Notice the first impulse, the impulse of the first half of that stanza, is sort of to apply it, right? To kind of move outward. Wherever you find long, thin grass, countless years' worth of leaves, ancient roots winding out and in, like it was back in Doriath, wherever you find circumstances like this, their white feet shall go lilting quick, right? You will find. It sounds almost like an invitation to applicability, right? This, Beren and whether they're going to be literally present. I mean, it seems to me that if we just literalize the first half of this stanza, right? Beren and Luthien shall be magically omnipresent in any ancient forests, right? But in younger forests, you won't find them, and they never hit the prairies, right? That seems kind of silly, and I don't think, so again, I think it seems to be more of an invitation to application. But never Dairon's music thin, shall go their white feet lilting quick, but never Dairon's music thin be heard beneath the hemlocks thick. We end on a bit of a downer, right? Dairon lost out. And it's not just that Dairon lost out, but we lost Dairon. Remember that the lilting feet of Tinuviel, nice as they were only half the picture originally, right? I mean, she had the flickering feet and he had the flickering fingers on the flute, right? So his magic was the counterpart of her dance. And now she dances with Beren. Her dance is in this sense complete, right? She has found her dance partner, and the two of them shall dance forever, morrowless and sorrowless. But no Dairon. The music of Dairon is lost since Beren came to Doriath. This, you will probably remember that in the Fellowship of the Ring, this last stanza goes away. In the forest singing sorrowless is the end of Aragorn's version of the poem. In the older version, we do get this sense of lost. Even a happy ending like this, even a crazily unexpected happy ending, even an unprecedentedly happy ending like this, doesn't come without loss, right? There are consequences. There's a price, in a sense, for it, and that, in this case, is the loss of Dairon. This poem is as I've said, awesome, but I think this poem is tremendously important. From what I can see, this seems to be the turning point in the story of Beren and Luthien. Let me explain what I mean by that. What I mean by that is, those of you who did the Book of Lost Tales class with me will remember that Beren wasn't human. He was an elf in the Book of Lost Tales version. He had toyed with the idea of making Beren human, but he wasn't human. He was kind of weighing in the kind of way he went with elf, right? They were of different races of elves, but so there was still a little bit of there was they had a certain degree of star-crossed lover action going on there, but that was not the main element of the story. They still met the same way. The fundamental narrative of Light as Leaf on Linden Tree happened in the Book of Lost Tales version. When we were talking about the Book of Lost Tales, I was emphasizing at the time that it's the fact that Beren is an elf, and I think it cannot be overstated what a profound impact it has on the Beren and Luthien story. I mean, in the Book of Lost Tales version, for all of the familiarity of most of the plot, you can see all of these plot parallels between that and even the published Silmarillion version. The Tale of Tinuviel, which is the Book of Lost Tales version, is recognizably the Beren and Luthien story, but it's not the Beren and Luthien story. I mean, it's not just like, one little thing changed, make him a man, and then it's pretty much the same. But it is a profound difference of the story. It makes the whole answer to the question, what is this story about, totally different. I can't prove that the writing of this poem is what changed Tolkien's mind, but it kind of looks like that to me. And again, it looks like that to me because of the way he has taken this and placed this by writing this short poem in this fairy story mode, right? Taking the story of Beren coming across Luthien and Dairon in the woods, like he did in the Book of Lost Tales version, but recasting that now as a mortal longing for the unattainable, inaccessible beauty of fairy, and then unexpectedly, unaccountably being granted it, right? When, that's the spirit of this poem. And when that happens, Tolkien never looks back. That becomes the dominant motif of this story all the way through, from now on. So I do think that this that this is really the sort of core, where the core of the Beren and Luthien story comes in. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to move on now because I'm totally not spending the whole class talking about this poem. Let's go on and talk about the Lay of Lethian. Since we have we have 40 minutes left. Let's talk about the Lay of Lethian, shall we? So we'll start at the beginning. A king there was in the dawn of days, his golden crown did brightly blaze, with ruby red and crystal clear, his meats were sweet, his dishes dear, red robes of silk and ivory throne, and ancient halls of arched stone, and wine and music lavished free, and 30 champions and 3, all these he had, and he did not. His daughter dear was Melilot, from dawn to dusk, from sun to sea, no fairer maiden found could be. Her robe was blue as summer skies, but not so blue as were her eyes. 'Twas sown with golden lilies fair, but none so golden as her hair. Okay. What the heck is going on here? What? Remember the context here. Okay. What we just read were the first 16 lines of the A text of the Lay of Lethian. So remember the context. Oh, hang on a second. I'm moving forward accidentally here. Remember the context here, right? Okay, so there are 2 texts of the Lay of Lethian. He wrote a handwritten manuscript, and then he typed it, right? So there's the handwritten bit, and there's the TypeScript bit, and they end at the same spot. He wrote it all out by hand, and then he went back later on and typed it. He was typing it as he was going back and typing it as he went, and he sometimes did this so that he could circulate the TypeScript which he did. He sent this typescript to C.S. Lewis, for instance. We're going to look at C.S. Lewis's commentary on the Lay of Lethian later on. He's doing this, and this is the beginning of the A text. Okay, this is the beginning of the manuscript version of the Lay of Lethian. So, as far as we can see, this is where the poem began. These are the opening. So he's sitting down. He's saying, Lay of Lethian, right? So remember where we were in the Lay of the Children of Húrin, right? We saw the Lay of Lethian kind of bubbling up and bubbling up. So here's Tolkien. He's been like, all right, you know what? Forget about it. Forget it. So I know he's not gonna sweep the table. I'm gonna take the Children of Húrin and I'm gonna put it in a neat stack and I'm gonna put it over here. Now, okay, I can hold back no longer, right? The story of Beren and Luthien is just, it's dying to be let out, right? So let's do that. So here he is. He's sitting down to write the Lay of Lethian, and this is what we get. Yana, I know, doesn't it? None so golden as her hair. Luthien is a blonde? I mean, seriously? No, wait. But her name isn't even Luthien. Her name is Melilot. Seriously, Tolkien? So, okay, I mean... So he sits down and he's like, okay, Beren and Luthien, yeah, well, I've been dying to write this story for a long time. So I'm going to write it, but I think I'm going to make a few changes, right? I think I'm not going to... I want Luthien, instead of like that shadowy hair thing she had going on, I want Luthien to be a honey blonde. Yeah. And Luthien, Tinuviel, that's kind of cool. But no, I think Melilot. That's a much better name, right? And by the way, did you notice what's her dad's name? What's her dad's name? Melilot's dad? Celegorm! Exactly, yeah. Yeah, the king is, yeah. Her dad, the king, yeah, Celegorm. That's a good name. I'll call him Celeborn. Oh, Celegorm. Sorry, I'll call him Celegorm. And her boyfriend, Beren, yeah, I can take that or leave that. What's her boyfriend gonna be? You're right, Sarah King. Melilot. Sorry, the idea of trying to insert that into that stanza. Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to come up with rhymes for Melilot in the context of that stanza, and they're all coming out really comical in my head. Sorry, anyway, who's her boyfriend? Her dad is Celegorm. Who's her boyfriend? In the A-text? Maglor is the name. What is that? Beren? Nah. Heck, we'll just call him Maglor. That's a better name than Beren, right? Okay, yeah. That's... I mean... I don't know about you, but when I read this... You guys are doing even worse than I am. People are suggesting rhymes now. Rhymes like polyglot. Or, Karina, that's my favorite. Fellalot. She tries to dance, but she fell a lot. Oh, man. It's awful. It's just... Oh, I can't. Stop. I can't. I absolutely can't. But you see the problem here. I mean, I read this opening and I'm like, who are you and what have you done with Tolkien, right? I mean, like, honestly, was he on something? I mean, was he thoroughly inebriated? But no, drunken Tolkien would not have made these decisions. I don't even know what on earth could have possessed him. And what's more, neither does Christopher. Look at Christopher's analysis of this. I love Christopher's tone throughout this. He's very understated. An extraordinary feature of the A version is the name Celegorm given to the king of the woodland elves, Thingol. Moreover, in the next canto, the role of Beren is in A played by Maglor, son of Egnor. Now, Egnor was his father's name, or close to his father's name, in the Book of Lost Tales version. So that name for Beron's father is not crazy. Maglor instead of Beron, that is crazy. And so here's Christopher Tolkien coming face to face with the crazy, right? The only possible conclusion, strange as it is that my father was prepared to abandon Thingol for Celegorm, and, even more astonishing, Beron for Maglor. Both Celegorm and Maglor, as sons of Feanor, have appeared in the Tale of the Naughlifring and in the Lay of the Children of Húrin. So he points out that just, like a couple years ago, he's just been writing the Lay of the Children of Húrin, and there were Celegorm and Maglor right there in the poem, and we even met Celegorm in the poem. And but he's going, nah, forget about it. No, Celegorm and Maglor have been, sons of Feanor for time immemorial, but what the heck, right? Let's just shake things up a little bit now, right? And again, here's Christopher saying, this appears to be what happened, but he obviously has no explanation for this, right? The name of the king's daughter in A, Melilot, is also puzzling. And is it the English plant name, as in Melilot Brandybuck, a guest at Bilbo Baggins' farewell party? Already in the second version of the Children of Húrin, Luthien has appeared as the true name of Tinuviel. It is perhaps possible that my father in fact began the Lay of Lethian before he stopped work on the Children of Húrin, in which case Melilot might be the first true name of Tinuviel, displaced by Luthien. But I think that this is extremely unlikely. You see the straw he's grasping at here? So he's invented this narrative, right? It's okay. So here's Tolkien. He's writing the Way of the Children of Húrin, and then meanwhile, like under the covers at night, he's already started the Lay of Lethian. Now, nothing could be more likely based on what we saw in the second version of the Children of Húrin, right? Totally willing to believe that. So the idea is, okay, he wrote these the first canto of the Lay of Lethian before he got to the bit in the Lay of the Children of Húrin when he named her Luthien, right? So prior to that point, when he was like during the early stage of the overlap, he was like, Melilot, oh yeah, no, forget Tinuviel, it's going to be Melilot. And then he gets to this later point and he's like, actually Luthien's kind of better. And that's when he gets to that point in the Way of the Children of Húrin. It is a theoretical explanation for how this could happen. But even he admits it's extremely unlikely that that's how it came about. And he goes on to explain, in view of Beron being changed to Maglor, I think that Luthien being changed to Melilot is far more probable. In any event, Beron and Luthien soon appear in the original drafts of the Lay of Lethian. And I love that last sentence where, Christopher Tolkien, we see him just kind of throw his hands up, right? He's like, fortunately, the temporary insanity which appears to have afflicted my father in this period passed quickly, right? So we can all move on and thank our lucky stars that we did not get the full version of the Lay of Honey Blonde Melilot, right? Ugh. Okay, so now, Christopher Tolkien says, the only possible conclusion is that my father was prepared to abandon Thingol for Celegorm and everything. It's not the only possible conclusion. I'm delighted to tell you, I do know one person who has posited a wonderful explanation of how all of these things could happen without Tolkien having been abducted by aliens or anything utterly inexplicable. And the brilliant scholar who came up with this idea is none other than our own Alyssa House Thomas, Mythgard student of long standing. In fact, Alyssa, if I'm remembering correctly, I know you're here tonight. If I'm remembering correctly, you posed this, you suggested, I don't know how long ago you came up with it, but you posed this theory to me, as I recall, in the very first Mythgard class that was ever offered in the fall of 2011. We talked about the Lay of Lethian in that class. And I believe we got to this part, and, in my lecture on this part, originally I was like, what the heck? This is just deeply weird. Let's try to move on before we hurt ourselves. And Alyssa very, very, very quietly and meekly was like, actually, I have a suggestion. And it was one of those solutions which, as soon as I heard it once, it was just obvious. And it to me, it makes absolute perfect sense of everything. And Alyssa's solution, in brief, is these lines, not these lines, these lines. This isn't the Lay of Lethian at all. Go back to the beginning. Look at this again. A king there was in the dawn of days, his golden crown did brightly blaze, with ruby red and crystal clear, his meats were sweet, his dishes dear, red robes of silk and ivory thrown in ancient halls of carven stone. Is this even an elvish king? I mean, he's called elvish later, but these lines, is this describing an elf? It's not obvious that it is describing an elf. When was the last time you heard Tolkien talking about how much an elf's food cost? Right? That's what his dishes dear means. His meats were sweet, his dishes dear. And by dishes, I'm not even sure if he means the food is expensive or the actual vessels that they ate out of were expensive. But in either case, that is not that's not how Tolkien normally. Now, it's not an uncommon motif in medieval fairy poetry for the poet to go off and say, like, so rich a sheet was upon the bed that, like, no emperor upon earth ever had a finer, and that kind of thing. It's not obvious that this is an elf. It sounds like a medieval human monarch. Alyssa's theory is beautifully simple. She says, it kind of sounds like this is what happened. Tolkien, at some point earlier on, started to write a Breton lay. This is a kind of thing Tolkien did a lot. To take a medieval mode, a medieval literary mode that he was interested in, and to write in it, to try to compose something in it. He'd already written a Breton lay, the Lay of Eotrue and Itrun, right? So who knows what the Lay of Melilot was going to end up being about. But anyway, so he decides to write this lay in the form of a Breton lay. This is, as Alyssa points out, exactly the poetic structure. Rhyming octosyllabic couplets is the sort of the Breton lay mode, poetically speaking. So he's going to tell this. So he's telling the story. We don't know exactly where the story was going to go, but he's going to tell the story of Melilot. Now, in that context, stop it, Arthur. Stop. Please stop with the Melilot rhymes. I can't handle it. There might be non-comical rhymes you could do, but I don't know. Anyway, stop distracting me with those. Anyway, okay. In the context of Tolkien just saying, hey, let's compose a Breton lay, it makes all kinds of sense for him to recycle names, like for him to have his heroine Melilot, and to say, hey, for her, I need a name for her dad. Hey, Celegorm. I like the name Celegorm. I'm going to recycle that one. And her boyfriend, Maglor, yeah, like that name. He recycled stuff like that all the time when he's doing things which he doesn't intend to connect. The most egregious example of his recycling a name like this is when he decides, is the original name that he gave to the goblin captain whose head gets knocked off by Bolror Took in Chapter 1 of The Hobbit. Does anybody recall? I know Alyssa does. I know several of the rest of you do. Fingolfin. Yes. Originally, in the original draft of The Hobbit, the king of the goblins whose head got lopped off by Bolror Took was Fingolfin, because it has the golf joke in it, right? So again, he's gonna take and he's gonna recycle the name Fingolfin in that context. He does that, right? So nothing could be more natural than for him to take two names which he liked, Celegorm and Maglor, and say, "Hey, my Breton lay of Melilot, I'm gonna use these here," right? Then, but he never finishes it. Big surprise, right? He writes the opening, but doesn't get any further than the very opening of this Breton lay. So now he goes to write the Lay of Lethian, and he takes these opening lines, this opening canto of the Lay of Melilot, or whatever the heck it was going to be called, and he's like, I'm just going to repurpose this thing. That, too, is something that he does all the time. And the fact that he would leave so much of it, like even the business with her golden hair, it's very typical. It's very typical for Tolkien to make very few changes when he's doing a revision like that. He tends to accommodate the old lines rather than just ripping them up and totally rewriting them. His normal habit when he's revising and integrating like that is to sort of make as few changes as possible and to make it all work. But of course, as he continues on, he changes the names back, of course, to Beren and Luthien. I don't believe that Luthien, in Tolkien's mind, was ever named Melilot. Again, once I felt like when Alyssa first outlined this theory for me, I felt like I'd been thrown a life preserver. I'm like, oh my gosh, that makes so much more sense. Like, it just... I literally cannot believe that Tolkien ever briefly toyed with the idea of changing Luthien's name to Melilot and making her a blonde. And please don't think I'm trying to insult blondes here, but the darkness of Luthien's hair is not only thematically important through every version of the Luthien story associated with shadow, indeed even her shadow cloak, which is made from her hair, right? I mean, it's like an important plot element, but more than that, you of course have the... one of the biographical connections to Tolkien's life that even I consider inescapable, and that is the connection with his wife Edith, whose hair was dark, and this moment of Beren meeting Luthien in the woods is associated explicitly by Tolkien with his courtship of his wife on many occasions. I cannot it is inconceivable, literally inconceivable to me, that he ever considered making her a blonde. Now, Alyssa asks in real time here an excellent question: why didn't Christopher get it? He has deep knowledge of his father's process. Yeah, he does. I mean, Alyssa, the only thing I can think here is that. Two things. One, there may be no surviving manuscript evidence of either any freestanding pre-Lay of Lethian text for the Lay of Melilot, such that, I mean, it seems to me quite possible that just Christopher never really thought of that. I mean, if you just accept this story within its manuscript context, it looks like it's him writing the Lay of Lethian, right? But secondly, the other way, Alyssa, in which this really seems to me like a typical kind of Christopher Tolkien move, is he is very, very cautious about speculating about things that his dad did not explicitly say, right? There are even times when a conclusion is like screamingly obvious. I would consider it screamingly obvious, and he's like super tentative or even skirts it because it's not like he can't prove it. It's not, so he just leaves it out. That seems to me in that sense kind of in keeping, that he would not even perhaps even be suspicious of something that he did, if he didn't, I mean, his dad might well not have mentioned, I mean, goodness, his dad might have forgotten, who knows when Tolkien wrote the abortive Lay of Melilot. I mean, if this theory is true, he might have written that like in the late teens, maybe early 20s. I mean, probably not much earlier than the early 20s, but who knows, right? So, I mean, would Tolkien have ever mentioned it to Christopher? Gosh, 50 years later, it's. I mean, I could easily imagine Tolkien might have utterly forgotten about this. I mean, he might have utterly forgotten even about the A manuscript. Christopher is not coming around to editing the documents of the Lays of Beleriand until many years now after Tolkien's death. It's been well over a decade since J.R.R. Tolkien died. So, been like, what, 15 years or so by the time the Lays of Beleriand comes out? So, it would not seem, it does not, Alyssa, it does not seem to me necessary to believe that Christopher and Tolkien had conversations about the early stages of the Lay of Lethian. It seems to me quite likely that Christopher is just working off of his father's manuscripts. And this is what the manuscript says. And Christopher says, I'm going to stick with what the manuscript says, however crazy it seems, right? Anyway, Sharon Hoff says, and I thoroughly agree, that Alyssa is brilliant from stepping away from the text and seeing the obvious. Yeah, absolutely, Sharon. That's definitely has always been my impression. Interesting. Tom Hillman says, what about the note in The Return of the Shadow, which says that Tolkien considered making Melilot Brandybuck, who is a good dancer, be the reincarnation of Luthien? Tom, I would set that to an association once made in Tolkien's mind and never died. I mean, you see that kind of thing. I mean, story ideas, character ideas, may be rejected but never forgotten. So, Tom, that seems to me totally natural. This character, who was named Melilot, became subsumed in Luthien. But it's like he still has this impulse to make Melilot... Poor Melilot got a bad shake, right? She becomes Luthien, but Melilot herself was rejected, right? So he brings Melilot back, connecting her with Luthien, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, see, Tom, I mean, I can imagine him, I know he didn't actually write that, but I mean, I can imagine him, like, the fact that the name comes up again, it's totally, like, he doesn't forget names, like, lost but not forgotten. It's like the name Bledorthin, right? Bledorthin, which is the original name for Gandalf, right? And not just in the opening draft of The Hobbit, but all the way through, almost all the way through the draft, up through the death of the dragon. The wizard is Bledorthin, right? And he drops the name, right? Gandalf, of course, was Thorin. The leader of the dwarves was Gandalf. He shifts the name of Gandalf the dwarf over onto the wizard. The wizard becomes Gandalf. The dwarf becomes Thorin. But we have like a law of conservation of names, right? So what about Bledorthin? Bledorthin, who's been the wizard this whole time, he comes back, right? He gets a mention. King Bledorthin, for whom those spears were made that are still standing in Smaug's treasure hoard when Bilbo goes down there and the dwarves are exploring it, and they talk about but yeah, I mean, it's we see he doesn't let the name go, so he brings it back up again. So it totally doesn't shock me that there's a hobbit named Melilot, right? And because again, poor Melilot vanished, but she's not completely forgotten. Anyway, okay. Let's go back then. Take two. To the revision. This is the TypeScript version. This is the version of the story that seems to be completely naturalized now, right? He does the TypeScript, so now we're really in the Lay of Lethian now. Okay. Oh, by the way, I wanted to before I forget, before I totally leave this behind, I'm going to share with you guys a copy of Alyssa's paper if you want to read her argument at length. She wrote this up eventually in a Mythgard paper that she wrote a couple semesters ago, and she gave me permission to share it with you. So if you would like to read her argument at length, she will do much better justice to it than I did in my short synopsis. There you go. You can download it through your control panel there. So, just wanted to share that with you. Okay, back to the beginning of the poem. Back to Thingol and Luthien, Baron. A king there was in days of old, ere men yet walked upon the mould. His power was reared in cavern's shade, his hand was over glen and glade. His shields were shining as the moon, his lances keen of steel were hewn, of silver grey his crown was wrought, the starlight in his banners caught, and silver thrilled his trumpets long, beneath the stars in challenge strong. Enchantment did his realm enfold, where might and glory, wealth untold, he wielded from his ivory throne, in many-pillared halls of stone. Their beryl, pearl, and opal pale, and metal wrought like fish's mail, buckler and corslet, axe and sword, and gleaming spears were laid in hoard. All these he had, and loved them less than a maiden once in elfiness, for fairer than are born to men, a daughter had he, Luthien. A daughter had he, Melilot. No, just doesn't work. This sounds like an elven king, right? Notice how we have the antiquity of the king. We had that in the first version, but we immediately get that with ere men yet walked upon the mould, right? We get all the, his hand was, we get him being explicitly associated not only with caverns, but with glen and glade, right? We have the moonlight and the starlight beneath the stars, all these, again, seems much more elvish now, doesn't it? But good, Brian, I agree that's an important element here. There's strong military imagery. I agree. This is a kind of a surprise. No, not kind of. This is a very surprising description of Thingol. This is a major departure from anything we have seen of Thingol in the past, other than in the Lay of the Children of Húrin. That is, this does seem to be continuous with that, which is not surprising. But from the point of view of the Book of Lost Tales, we've gotten this character of Thingol. He wasn't called that. He was called Tinuviel before, but nevertheless, that guy, he was a woodland king who had a crown of leaves or of flowers, like the woodland king in The Hobbit, but he was also poor and didn't have that much treasure, like the elven king in The Hobbit. So he's not rich, and he's not super powerful. He rules in Doriath. He still has his awesome wife, but he's not this guy, right? This guy is extremely wealthy and very powerful. His hand was over glen and glade. That's a really interesting. His power was reared in cavern's shade. His hand was over glen and glade. The power, the authority of Thingol is what's really emphasized here, right? As well as his wealth. Any of these lines sound kind of hauntingly familiar to anybody? Anyone find themselves having a strange kind of memory experience in listening to this passage? Yeah, Sarah the Dwarf song, right? Many pillared halls of stone, their beryl, pearl, and opal pale, and metal wrought like fish's mail, buckler and corslet, axe and sword, and shining spears are laid in hoard. That's from the Durin song that Gimli sings in Moria. Or rather, that passage, that stanza that is given to Gimli in the Durin song in Moria is lifted word for word out of the description of Thingol's Hall here in the Lay of Lethian. And that's kind of amazing. If you remember the context of that passage in the Song of Durin that Gimli sings, he talks about the antiquity of Durin and how Durin looked in Mirror and saw a crown of stars appear like gems upon a silver thread above the... I'm losing a word. Above the shadow? of his head. Shoot, I'm losing a word. I almost had it. Anyway, so he sees the crown in the mirror pier, and then we get the description of Moria and how awesome it is, of Khazad-dûm, of course I should say, and how awesome it is and how rich and how powerful. And then we get this stanza, but the context of this stanza is about the craftsmanship of the dwarves. We have their relationship with the works of their hands. And that's the list of all the stuff that the dwarves made, right? But in context here, Josiah says, first they stole his gold and then they stole his verse. No wonder the Elven King is annoyed with the dwarves. Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. It's fascinating to me that, again, it's not that, because although in our minds, because we all probably read, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that all of us read The Lord of the Rings before we read the Lays of Beleriand. It would be fascinating to meet the person who first read the Lays of Beleriand and then the Lord of the Rings. I mean, I guess there's C.S. Lewis and that reviewer from Allen and Unwin, but other than them, I don't think. Anyway, but since we're familiar with the Lord of the Rings first, it's hard for us not to think of this as kind of a reference to the dwarves, right? But it's not a reference to the dwarves. Instead, we have the proper way to say it is that, isn't it interesting that a passage describing the wealth and the halls of the Elven King focused so much on the accumulation of crafted goods that it could be used word for word, could be adapted word for word to a passage describing the craftsmanship of the dwarves and them relishing their works of hand. That is to say, Thingol seems surprising. He's not only surprisingly militaristic and authoritarian and powerful, but materialistic. It's an unfair word to use. But do you see what I mean? That is all this emphasis on his stuff, right? Look at all the stuff he had. For the dwarves with Durin, it's not just stuff, right? I mean, yeah, they've got stuff, but it's because they made the stuff, right? The emphasis is on the making of the stuff, not just on the hoarding of the stuff. Thingol is just hoarding stuff. I mean, presumably the elves are making a lot of it too, but again, the context does not focus on the making, but on the hoarding. Hoard is the word that's actually used there. And Kate Neville points out it's also ironic, considering the eventual relationship between Thingol and the dwarves. Yeah, Kate, in fact, you could almost call it foreshadowing. Because the whole hoarding thing is what's going to become an issue for Thingol later on. Okay, good. So again, this is an eye-opening description of Thingol. We get Luthien and Dairon again, as in the poem, as in Lay of Lethian. There Luthien, the lissom maid, would dance in dell and grassy glade, and music merrily, thin and clear, went down the ways, more fair than ear of mortal men at feast hath heard, and fairer than the song of bird. When leaves were long and grass was green, when Dairon with his fingers lean, as daylight melted into shade, a wandering music sweetly made, enchanted fluting, warbling wild, for love of Thingol's elfin child. We can see the fact that his music is called thin is interesting. That's an echo of Lightest Leaf on Linden, a direct echo of Lightest Leaf on Linden Tree. But notice the emphasis in this poem, even stronger than it was in Lightest Leaf on Linden Tree, of the interconnection between Dairon's #1 rated music, right? He's the greatest musician of all time, as the poem makes clear. He's the foremost of all of the top three musicians ever. Of course, you may remember in the published Silmarillion, the top three is reduced to a top two, right? It's just it becomes a two-horse race between Maglor and Dairon. Poor Tinfang Warble just drops straight out of it, or Tinfang Gellion, as he's called here for some reason. But anyway, and Arthur, yeah, I agree. It's a little much that he is said to be warbling. Here's taking over Tinfang's word. yeah, Corinne, it's just like "Oh the Hoot," but not quite. That's how one of the poem entitled "Tinfang Warble" has one of my favorite first lines of all of Tolkien's poetry. "Oh the hoot, oh the hoot," how he trillips on his flute. Anyway, okay, so. But again, notice the intricate connection, as I said, between Luthien and Dairon's music. All of his singing, all of his number one rated music is done for love of Thingol's elfin child. The change which happened in the poem in Lays of Beleriand is now made much more emphatic. In the Book of Lost Tales, Dairon and Luthien were brother and sister. They were the two children of Thingol and Melian. Now, he is very plainly and very firmly the romantic rival of Beren. Okay. One more. Hey, we got through Canto 1. That's almost better than I expected. The beginning of Canto. So remember, the beginning of Canto 1 started with that very impressive Thingol description and his power and his kingdom. Stanza 2. Far in the north, 'neath hills of stone and caverns black, there was a throne by fires illumined underground, that winds of ice with moaning sound made flare and flicker in dark smoke. The wavering bitter coils did choke the sunless airs of dungeons deep, where evil things did crouch and creep. There sat a king, no elfin race, nor mortal blood, nor kindly grace of earth or heaven might he own. Far older, stronger than the stone the world is built of, than the fire that burns within, more fierce and dire, and thoughts profound were in his heart, a gloomy power that dwelt apart. Canto 1, we get Thingol. Canto 2, we get Morgoth. Right? King Morgoth. Notice the parallels. Authority. Right? Power. Militarism. We're getting to the militarism. We'll see the weapons that he can command in the next passage. But notice how he is described here. I just love the description, starting at line, 107? There sat a king, no elfin race, nor mortal blood, nor kindly grace of earth or heaven might he own. All these negatives, right? He's a king. He's not an elf. He's not a mortal. He cannot own, that is, he cannot claim any kindly grace of earth or heaven. If he's none of those things, what is he? Far older, stronger than the stone the world is built of. So he's older and stronger than the stone. He is more fierce and dire than the fire that burns within the earth. And thoughts profound were in his heart. Profound strikes me as the theme of this whole description, right? He is profound. He is deep. He is subterranean. He is like the foundations of the earth itself. He is like the dark but melting fire that lurks beneath the crust of the earth. Deep underground, the world is gnawed by nameless things, right? The king, who is as yet nameless here in this description, is, the greatest of those nameless things that gnaw the earth. It's You can see my reference in the subtitle there to the Tale of Two Cities. I always think of that at the beginning of the stanza. We get the way that Dickens balances, the one king and the other king at the beginning of the Tale of Two Cities. The way that Thingol and Morgoth are sort of poised as these parallel figures. And I agree, Kate, the use of king for Morgoth does seem to put him on a more equal level with Thingol. The description shows that he's way beyond elves or anything else, right? Thingol might have been ruling since before mortals walked upon the mold, but he's not older and stronger than the stone the world is built of, right? But nevertheless, you're right. We do have. I do think even just calling him King Morgoth, but the parallel nature of these descriptions really, for me, makes it impossible not to be connecting the two of those and seeing those two together, especially since sort of Doriath and Fangordrum, and Angband, the strongholds of Thingol and of Morgoth are kind of the parallel poles. And we get Nargothrond, of course, also as an important location in this poem. But you've got those two poles. You've got both of them are these sort of impenetrable places. Both of them are these sort of, I want to say safe havens, but of course I mean that in different senses, right? Angband isn't safe in the same way that Doriath is safe, but you'd think that Morgoth and his stuff would be as safe in Angband as Thingol and his stuff are, at least as safe as Thingol and his stuff are in Doriath, surrounded by the girdle of Lothian. But again, that's sort of the whole point. And then you see, Beren comes where mortals are not allowed to come, into Doriath, and is, as a consequence, forced to go to where mortals theoretically can't go, or aren't supposed to be able to go, into Angband. So I really love the parallel structure there and the way that sort of how much of the poem is set up there. Well, we'll come back to this next time. I want to look at the story of Gorlin, which is new. This is a brand new element of the story, and I'm really interested in the way that it's depicted here in the poetic version. So I want to talk about Gorlin, and look a little bit at Beren's flight, and then of course we will look at since we don't have Light as Leaf on Linden Tree to talk about, or the deeply puzzling Melilot business at the beginning of the poem to sort through next time, I do hope to move forward a little bit faster. Good final point here from Josiah. Josiah McCoy says, both of the kings go nameless for quite a while in their descriptions, which increases their mythic antagonism. They're not just Thingol and Morgoth, they are the king of glen and glade and the king of hills of stone. Love that point, Josiah. I think that's an excellent way of thinking about it. And again, it's not that, they're exactly peers, because they're clearly not exactly peers, but I agree. I think that's a really important effect. Okay. We'll come back to Canto 2 next time, and keep reading. Make sure you keep reading on the schedule. I think we're going through Canto 8 next time, and we are going to move along a little faster next time. So totally, you can count on that. But anyway, I will let you guys go now tonight. Thank you very much for joining me tonight, and I look forward to making some serious progress in the Lay of Lethian next week. Thanks, everybody. Good night.